Hello, friends. Welcome to Move Into Coherence. I'm Pamela Stokes. In today's episode, we will be learning about viruses, what they are, what they can and cannot do. And we'll be doing an EFT tapping script that I created so that we can find freedom around this information and to feel comfortable in our bodies. Our bodies know how to heal ourselves. So let's get into it. We'll start with our 3 bells and a little heart coherence. Then we'll do some waking and shaking. And then we'll get into the information. So let's begin. Thank you for being here. And let's just jump right into a little heart coherence now. So go ahead and bring your awareness into the area of your heart, your chest area. And if it's helpful for you, you can place a hand there if that feels comfortable. And then we'll slow our breath down a little deeper and a little slower than usual. And in the experimentation that they did, they found 5.5 seconds was ideal, but we don't need to be that precise. So 5 or 6 seconds in and 5 or 6 seconds out is great if that feels good for you today. And always through the nose, if possible. And then please bring to mind something that helps you to feel a sense of gratitude or appreciation. And I like to think of something, a scene in nature, pretty neutral. And then over the next 2 or 3 breaths, allow yourself to come back into your natural breathing and let your eyes open to a soft gaze. And you can relax your hand. All right, so this information is new information to me in the last, I would say, 2.5 years. So I'm pretty well versed in it. I've studied it a lot. And before that, I studied biology. I have a degree in biology and with honors. And I actually taught biology to 7th and 8th graders. And I also taught science to 4th and 5th graders for many years. And I was in charge of the science fair. So I had to teach them the scientific method, and they brought their questions to me and we figured out how to do their experimentation using controls. And so this is something that I am definitely, I would say, very well versed in the scientific method. So when I heard this information and I heard that it was based on faulty science and not using the scientific method, then it pricked up my ears, and so I really dove into it. And this information comes from a lot of different sources, and you can check this out for yourself. And I really encourage you to do that because there are a lot of resources. The main focus of my information today is going to be coming from a paper that was written by a doctor named Dr. Mark Bailey, who is the husband of Dr. Sam Bailey, and the website is drsambailey.com. And you can see the paper there. But it's a very scientifically worded uh, article, and it's got a lot of words. So if you don't want to challenge yourself with that information that way, another way to find out is, or to hear about this, is on the website Odyssey, ODYSEE.com. And there is a video there called A Farewell to Virology, Part 1. And the intention is that there will be a Part 2 and a Part 3 eventually, but Part 1 is available now. And this is based on Dr. Mark Bailey's paper. There are many other sources. There are many films that have been created and books that have been written. And so I'm not just making this up. This is something that I feel is important to share with you because it feels like, well, as winter is coming here in the Northern Hemisphere, the idea of illness comes up, and people tend to find themselves not feeling well. And I want to help you to understand what isn't going on and potentially find yourself in a healing phase rather than feeling sick. We can feel like we're healing. And that's what the body's all about. The body is ever creating more life, and that's what life does, is it wants more life, always wants more life. I have to admit, when I was in 7th grade biology class learning this about viruses, I understood it to be that there are these viruses out there, and they can come in and they can attack our cells, and then the cells make so many, and then the cell bursts, and now they're all around, and more cells can get infected, and all of that. And I thought to myself in my 12-year-old brain, boy, then why isn't everybody sick all the time? You know, why aren't we just all dying all the time? And that kind of thought process has now brought me to this understanding about viruses. So here we go. First thing I'd like to say is that in the scientific method, this is something that is standardized and it is accepted as the way you do science. So you observe something in nature that's occurring, and then you make a hypothesis about that observation, and then you design an experiment that will test that hypothesis. And the hypothesis is just a guess, educated guess. You test the hypothesis by using experimentation in which you are isolating only the one thing that you are testing, and everything else stays the same. You change one aspect of it, and everything else stays the same. And this is called a control. So we have controls where all the conditions are exactly the same, but the one thing that you're trying to test in the hypothesis has been changed. So these things over here that we're keeping the same, that's called the control. Now, when I found out that in the field of virology, they don't do controls, right away, I thought, well, that doesn't make any sense. That's not the scientific method. They're not following the scientific method. And then if we go back from there and ask the question, well, what were the observations? How did you even know that there was a virus? And that is a big question mark. So just kind of, there wasn't really an observation first. So the whole thing kind of falls apart if you look at it in those ways, using the scientific method, which is a trusted path of how you do science properly. So Dr. Mark Bailey is a experienced doctor in clinical studies, and so he really gets the scientific method. That's one of the things that he did for many, many years. And so this information coming through him, really just validates that point of view that if you're not following the scientific method, how can we call it valid science? So that's the first thing. And now let's get into the specifics. So we're talking about most recently this so-called or purported virus that they've named SARS CoV2. And what I wanted to say about that is the information that describes the virus only includes the coding of the DNA in a computer. So this is what we call an in silico virus. It's not something that has been shown to be observed in nature. It's only been shown to be something that is producible as a virtual virus. So there's nothing physical. It's only in silico. And every aspect of that makes no sense to me because it doesn't exist. There's nothing to observe. So first step first, SARS-CoV-2 is a virtual virus, and it's based on the information from SARS, which was the first virus that was also in silico. And so they said, well, it's enough like SARS, the original SARS, so we're going to call it SARS-2 or SARS-CoV, coronavirus 2, based on the original SARS-1, which was also in silico. So what this means is that there is no physical particle of this virus. And what that then therefore would tell us is that all of the things that we are trying to do to prevent it, so-called prevent it, are unnecessary because there's nothing physical there that they can find. So that's SARS-CoV-2. Let's go back in time and see if we can understand a little bit more about viruses in general. So this information that I'm giving you may be sending your nervous system into a little bit of activity. So I would love for you to go ahead and place your hand over your heart, or you can do the hand hold that we did last time where you put your thumb in the middle of one hand and then wrap the other hand around it. So you can rest that in your lap and just allow your nervous system to be calm as this information is coming in. You can also allow yourself to breathe through the nose deeply into the lungs and relax the diaphragm. And that will help to keep the information from feeling scary. Because this is taking an assumption, something we thought was true, and we're breaking that open today. So the background on viruses, well, we have to go way back into the 1700s, where a man named Edward Jenner, who purchased his MD. He didn't actually earn his medical degree. A lot of people did it back then where they just paid money and they got the name doctor. So he was not actually a doctor, but he was, and he wasn't really that good of a scientist, but in any case, someone brought to him the idea that if we saw that there's sort of a wives' tale, but in the urban legend, some of the cow milking maids were not getting smallpox as readily as other people in the community. And he said, oh, that's, hogwash, I don't believe that. But in any case, he went ahead and pursued it. So it's kind of weird that at first he said, yeah, that's a bunch of bunk. But then he came back and said, well, actually, let's try this. So it's kind of weird right away at the beginning. So what vaccination was, and this is where it comes from, the word vaccine comes from, is the name, the Latin name for cow is vacca. And so you get the beginning part of vaccine from that, from cow. So what he did was he took sores from a cow udder that they called a cowpox sore wound, and took some of the material from that, some of the pus and yucky stuff, and then on a person's arm, he would make a small incision and put the cowpox pus in there. And this was what they called vaccination. And the idea was that if you had some of the cowpox stuff, that you would then be immune to the smallpox. And it didn't really work. But a lot of people were putting up a fuss about it and saying, this isn't working. And in fact, people were getting really sick from doing this. But he was in the high level of society, and people sort of praised him and wanted to give him the accolades. And so some of the people kind of kept going with that. And it turned into a big deal. There were, a lot of people that were mandated in Europe to become vaccinated, even though it hadn't really been proven. And in fact, the smallpox epidemics kept increasing and kept coming back. So it didn't really work. And a lot of people died. There was a city in the UK called Leicester. And in 1869, they had a lot of protests, but in 1869, they actually passed a law that said, no, we're not vaccinating here, and you don't have to be vaccinated. And the number of deaths decreased significantly, like by 75%. So that was a pretty good testament, but it kind of fell away over time, and they vaccinate now. But one of the things that they were talking about there was that what would improve the outcomes of disease was sanitation, increasing the sanitation modalities that they were using, instead of just pouring rubbish and human waste into the gutter and dead animals and things like that just all around. They started dealing with that a little bit better, a lot better, and things improved. Well, the number of smallpox cases came down so low that by the time the vaccination came into being, there were very few cases. And then as the vaccine was being used, more cases came. So it really wasn't a very good, it wasn't well proved, it wasn't tested, and a lot of death occurred over that 1800s and into the 1900s. But there was improved sanitation, and that made a lot of difference. In modern times, there's a doctor named Dr. Paul Thomas, and he has a practice, a clinical practice, where he treats patients. And he's not a vaccine advocate because of this. There's no proof that, from historically, that it does any good. And he looked at the information from his patients. He had 10 years of information from people that were raised up using vaccines regularly, and then another group of people in his patient care that were not vaccinated. And he compared the health outcomes for these people. And in every single way of looking at it, like how many colds they had, and how well they maintained their health, and health issues and chronic issues and things like that, allergies and so forth, everything was vastly different between the two. The unvaccinated people were much, much healthier than the ones with the vaccine. So you can see that for yourself as well. So this has been going on a long time, the movement of people saying nothing's really working, and people are getting sicker, and more chronic disease and autism and things like that are showing up. So That's the piece about vaccines. It's never really been shown to do anything because initially we need to have something there, an actual particle or virus. So let's talk about what that means, what viruses are. So back in the day of Jenner, when we're talking about these early vaccines and cowpox and smallpox and all that, they didn't know what was causing it. They just said this is what is happening, and people are getting sick, and so they didn't really call it a virus then. But in the 1800s, I would say, yeah, probably more like the late 1800s, they looked under a microscope and they tried to, take some snot or some coughed up mucus from a sick person, and to look under a microscope, and they couldn't find any particular bacteria. That's what they were used to seeing in those days in the microscope. And they couldn't see anything that was different between healthy and sick people. So they just made up a name. They said, oh, it must be something else we can't see. It's too small. And we'll call it a virus. And the term virus is Latin for, I want to make sure I say this right, poison, slime, or venom. So it doesn't have to do with a particle, self-replicating particle with DNA and a protein coat and all the things that we've learned about as far as what we now call viruses. This was early days, and they didn't even really know what it was. So they never saw it in the microscope. And they also were not able to detect anything that was different between sick people and well people by collecting their samples from their nose and eyes and throat and even blood. They couldn't find anything that was different between the two in enough of an amount to say this exists. So remember, the first part of the scientific method is have an observation. Well, they didn't have an observation. They couldn't find enough. And in fact, I've heard an anecdotal story of someone, Dr. Tom Cowan, who I'll refer to later, who he said he asked someone high up in virology, well, what if you had 10 people and you collected the sample? Could you find it? And they said, no, it's not enough. Well, what if you had 100 people? No, still not enough. What about 1,000? No. What about 10,000? And then the guy got silent. He just didn't want to answer any more questions. So really, if these viruses are coming in and attacking cells and replicating and making more and bursting cells open and doing that, wreaking havoc, you would think that when you coughed up, you would find a bunch of them. And that's not the case. So they haven't really been able to find them. So a fellow named John Enders I think it was in the 50s, 1950s, decided, well, viruses need cells to go inside of and to replicate in there. So I'll make up a protocol. And we still use this protocol today in virology, or virologists use it. This protocol is very interesting and kind of weird, but what they do is they take the sample from a human or an animal or even a plant, and they put it into what's called a cell culture. And this cell culture is made from mainly monkey kidney cells. So it's interesting to me that if you're looking for a human virus, that you would need to use a different animal species. So that's the first thing that I kind of go, that's interesting. Why would we need a different species of animal? But they found that human tissue wasn't able to grow these viruses, and they're not even finding the particles at the end of the experiment or the end of the culturing. What they do with this, well, let me back up just one step. When they talk about isolating the virus, in my mind, I always imagined, well, they have like a bunch of particles and they're pure, and they can say these are all viral particles. This is like a sample, right? That's a pure thing. It's isolated from everything else. Well, in virology, they've changed the meaning of the word. instead of that, what they actually mean by isolation is that they've taken a sample from a human, and that's what they call isolation. But again, there's no observation first of a particle existing. So what they're calling isolation is they've changed the meaning of the word. Back to Enders and what he did. So he put the cell culture together with monkey kidney cells, and what he's trying to find was when these cells would break apart. They call it the cytopathic effect. And what that means is the cells are dying basically, and when they open up, we should find all the viral particles in there. That's what the cytopathic effect indicates, that there are viruses. But again, we aren't observing the particle. We are observing an effect of a purported particle, something that they imagine is there. Remember, before this, we just didn't really even know what it was. We called it a virus, poison, slime or venom, not a particle. So when Enders came along, put it in the cell culture, he also had to add antibiotics so that if there were bacteria that they would get killed. Well, antibiotics are toxic to cells. And he added, he had to add some fetal cells from a cow, interestingly enough, back to the cow again. But he added these fetal cells from a cow and fetal serum from the cow baby, so that the cells would grow more. Because if he didn't have that, they would die very quickly. So he wanted to keep the cells alive longer. So he added this bovine, which is cow, serum, and it comes from the in utero fetus of a cow. Sometimes they use human fetus serum and fetus cells in these mixtures in virology, and especially when they are making vaccines from them. The protocol then of Enders, after all of these things, and another thing that they would add, that he added, was trypsin, which is a protein digesting enzyme. So that's the idea, is to digest the proteins. So he didn't really do a control. Well, he did do a control, but he didn't explain it well. He had a cell culture where he had added the isolated, again, that word isolated just means it came from a person. He added the goo, the snot or whatever, into the sample, into the cell culture. And then he did another cell culture where he didn't add any of the isolate. However, what he found was the cytopathic effect occurred in both. And so what he explained, he just basically explained it away and said, oh, there must have been a problem, an issue, but he didn't repeat that. So control kind of went out the window, and the scientific method went out the window, because it, first of all, never started with an observable thing, and then there were no controls in the experiment. And today, even today, virologists use this method. They call it a cell culture, and this is, they say, the only way that you can get viruses, because there's not enough of them in a human sample. All right. Well, in 2021, a virologist who was pretty keen to, I guess, sort of expose this fraudulent, poorly done science, decided he wanted to do an actual control. So he did. He set it up with all the same ingredients in the cell culture, minus the sample from a human. And regardless, both of them had the cytopathic effect, and it happened in both the culture that had viral, or I should say samples, isolated samples from a human, and also in the one that did not have any sample in there. So he proved basically that the cytopathic effect will happen regardless of the condition, if you've added the sample from a human, a sick human. So that, to me, That's pretty recent. And 2021, Dr. Stefan Lanka is his name, and you can look this information up. I'm not making any of this up, by the way. And if you need to, feel your feet on the floor, feel the space in your feet, feel the space in your hands, and just take a little moment here, because this is all very, yeah, very new information for your nervous system. We are taking an assumption and we're breaking it open here. So give yourself just a moment to take that in. All right. So let's go back into what started this whole thing anyway. The idea of contagion is where this all begins. The idea that one organism that is not well can pass something to another organism and make it also unwell. This has never been proven. And when I say never, I mean ever, ever, not once. What we're talking about includes things that we are commonly told, that we've been told for our whole lifetime. And I've taught this to my own students and my children. And, it's part of what we think is true, that that a sick person can make another person unwell, or a plant or an animal can do that between species, and also to us, that we can get sick from animals and so forth. Never been proven. And that includes things like polio and measles and smallpox and chickenpox and Ebola and HIV and herpes and rabies. Never has been shown to be able to transmit from one organism to another, as many times as it has been tried, hundreds of times over the last couple of 100 years. It's never been proven, not once. What that means is I can't make you sick. You can't make me sick. Coughing on someone, sneezing on someone, touching someone's stuff, it doesn't happen. It's never been shown. So one of the things about the scientific method is, if you keep disproving your hypothesis, you can pretty much conclude that your hypothesis was wrong. And this goes back to Pasteur. We're talking about Louis Pasteur, pasteurization, all of that. Well, the story about Pasteur is very interesting. There's a book called Pasteur or Béchamp, Bechamp. He's a French guy too. And they were they were contemporaries, and Béchamp was a valid scientist. He did research for decades, and he found so many wonderful things that got kind of kind of pushed away, and people didn't really want to hear about it because it was so different from everything that we had known. Well, Pasteur, however, was the big man on campus. He was highly praised by the Emperor of France at the time, and he was kind of held up in society as this great scientist. Pardon me, I'm going to get a drink of water here. And so basically, Béchamp and Pasteur were working at the same time, and they were looking at fermentation. And Béchamp figured out fermentation happens naturally within the grapes themselves. Excuse me. Happens within the grapes themselves. There's something within the grape that is causing the process, and it's a nutritional thing. They're eating something, and then the waste product is alcohol. Well, Pasteur took that information, plagiarized it, put out a paper that said that he had done the experimentation, which wasn't true, and then came to a false conclusion. And what he concluded in this, from Béchamp's information, was not that it had come from within the grape, but that it had come from the outside, that there was something attacking the grapes, and that's what was making this happen. So he basically created the germ theory out of thin air. There wasn't any validity to his science and his working. So he plagiarized Béchamp. He made a false conclusion, and this started the whole ball rolling of what we call germ theory. It is a theory. It's not fact. As I said, contagion has never been proven. So, and we know this because Pasteur had his notebooks and he told his family, don't let anyone see this. Well, back in the 90s, one of his ancestors said, well, we need to release these documents. And they found that he had actually fraudulent, frauded. I can't think of the word right now. He had created fraudulent data. This is Pasteur. So the whole process of pasteurization, not even necessary, actually. It doesn't, according to Béchamp's work, and I'll talk about this in another episode, but according to Béchamp's work, and according to Wilhelm Reich, who also worked with these very small little parts of us called bions or somatids, he found that even immense heat was unable to kill them. So actually pasteurization really does nothing except for destroy proteins and good things that we would need. So I think probably a lot of people might be wondering, okay, well, if it's not viruses and it's not the germs and it's not these things making us sick, what is making us sick? Well, lots of things can make us unwell. And that unwellness is actually our body's way of getting the thing out. So if it's a toxin, it's removing the toxin by coughing, by sneezing. Excuse me. If there's something in the body that needs to be, where more life needs to be created, you might get a fiery, get more like a fever. Okay, so these are the things that happen in the body so that there is always more life. That is the equation of life. Life always creates more life. So this, these sicknesses, what we call sickness, is actually healing symptoms. And things like some people are talking about this, like there's toxins in our environment and there's new radiation and this could be making people ill. I believe that's possible because it's new, it's novel, it's not something our body recognizes, and it's not something that we're able to deal with regularly. However, I want to tell you a quick little piece about the planaria. Planaria are flatworms. They're very small, and there's a scientist named Mike Levin who works with them regularly. Now, what's really cool about planaria is that they can be sliced, and no matter where they're sliced, well, I think you have to have a little bit of the tip of the head, but basically you slice it, cut it into pieces. Each half will become a new one. And that's how they regenerate in their own life cycle, is that they break apart and a new one will grow from the broken piece. So you can divide them like 200 something times and still get more new ones. So they're basically, able to regenerate. That's the term that they use. So with these planaria, Mike Levin put them into a solution of barium. Now, barium is not something that planaria are used to experiencing. So what happened was, he said the heads died, but the tails stayed alive, and then a new head grew. And we're able to use barium. So the first iteration of the planaria couldn't handle the barium. The second iteration could. And this is evolution. This is adaptation instantly like this. It didn't take a lot of generations or a change in DNA. They didn't know how to deal with barium, but they did. So what I'd like to say about that is, if you ever wonder about something new, something toxic, something that might be poisonous to you, just remember the barium planarium. They and we, because we're all life wants more life, right? We will learn how to adapt to these toxins. And I think part of that is having a calm attitude about them and not being in fear. However, some people will get, jumbled up in their systems, and we can have illness, we can have symptoms with that. No doubt about it, symptoms do exist. People do feel lousy, but if we call it the healing process, that's a really nice way to feel about it. Our body's on our side. Our body's on our team. It's not trying to harm us. It wants ever more life. This is important to remember. Okay, so what also makes us sick? Well, in the Mayo Clinic, they have a statement that says about 85% or more of illness is emotionally based. It's based on our emotions, how we feel. And if we look at the term emotion, it was coined in the 1800s to indicate energy in motion. That's what emotion means. So what we're really doing when we feel emotions, when they're even tough emotions, is that's moving energy. And what we do a lot in Move Into Coherence in this podcast is we talk about ways to get the body moving, get those emotions moving, processing things, and getting the nervous system to calm itself so that we can handle these big emotions, because they will come. We will feel grief and sadness and anger, and all of these things are felt. And when we feel them, our body reacts and our cells react and our electrical system reacts. And so these are the things that can make us feel unwell. And then the symptoms will happen in trying to get the body back into balance. We call that homeostasis. This is something the body's really good at. And what we need to do is to support the body. Try not to suppress the symptoms. So if you have a fever or inflammation or pain, try not to suppress that. Just go in there and support it. Support it in however you can, making the body feel like you're on its team, right? And some of the things you can do is very simple, just really simple things like getting fresh air, getting sunlight in your eyes and on your skin, standing on the earth barefoot, grounding, earthing, they call that, drinking pure water, eating good food, and having a positive outlook on life, sleeping in the dark without light on and noises. All right. So I wanted to talk about, I just mentioned a couple things regarding the mood. I did some podcast episodes on depression and anxiety. Depression is episodes 75 through 77, and anxiety 72 to 74. So you might want to take a look at those or listen to those so that you get some ideas if those are things that are bothering you. There's other episodes on loneliness and anger, and lots of different episodes. And in fact, I have done an episode on viruses, episode 78, if you'd like to hear that. There's some information there. That's kind of the shorter version of today. The other thing that we can do besides our mood and our emotions is we can also imagine, because the brain doesn't know the difference between imagined and real. We can imagine that we are filling up with energy. And one of the great meditations I learned and found is called Being the Brightest Light. And I did this in episodes 45 and 46, both with music and without music. So you can check that out. And that just really helps you feel the energy coming into the body. Oh, I just realized I forgot to do waking and shaking. I just got so focused on what I was doing today that I left that part out. But I think we're going to move on because we have a lot to cover today. So the idea that we can't make anybody sick, we can't get sick from anybody, kind of gives us a lot of freedom if we can look at it that way. That I feel is something that's important to know. Just looking at some notes here to make sure I'm not leaving anything out. Oh yeah, John Enders, the guy who came up with the virology test, the cell culture, he won a Nobel Prize. So they gave him a prize, even though it was not controlled. Very interesting to me. Let's see. One of the things is when they look at viral particles and people find them in electron microscope pictures, they might say, "Oh, well, there it is. You know, there's the virus." Well, they're just saying we know that there's a virus. We're assuming, and then there it is. It's circular reasoning. There's no evidence that there was anything in the first place, but they said, "Well, here in the pictures we can find it." Well, if you ask a virologist, that's what they'll say. If you ask a microscopist, somebody who works with microscopy, they'll say you cannot distinguish the difference between what we're calling viruses and what are naturally occurring little bits of cells that come out. They call them exosomes. Basically, they're little external bodies to the cell. So is it the cell breaking down just naturally, which happens naturally? Or is it something else? And there's no way to distinguish the two, even in an electron microscope photograph. Wanted to make sure I made that clear. Okay. Yes. So I think that's about it with the information. So we're going to do this tapping script. This is a really important part of this because as we are learning something new like this, so it's assumptions shattered, it could be traumatizing. That's not my intention today. My intention is to help us find freedom from this fraudulent germ theory, which has never been proven, never been shown to exist. Viruses have never been shown to exist. The one that we're all, riled up about and vaccinating people for is in silico. It's not even a real thing. It's only in a computer. So this is new information, and it can be kind of jarring to the system. So not my intention to do that. That's why I created this script. I'm using all the information that we just learned, and that will help us to calm our nervous system as we say these words out loud. So please, if you would, find yourself in a comfortable position. And we're going to do this virus script, which will be in the transcript if you want to repeat this for yourself. And I always put the chapter markers so you can find it when you look at the video. You can go right to it if you'd like to do this again. And I would suggest, because it's such a big topic, that it would be really important for you to do this probably more than once. Okay, so let's begin by taking 3 calming breaths through the nose and deep into the lungs. Inhale and exhale. And you may want to slow your exhale down a little bit. And then another breath. Thinking about the bottoms of your lungs receiving this, and exhale. And one more time, inhale and slow exhale. All right. And you can use the standard tapping points, top of the head, between the eyes, side of the eye, under the nose, under the lips, collarbones, side of the body. You can use those, which I talked about in another episode, previous episode. Or you can just simply place your hand, spread it open, and have your thumb underneath one collarbone and your fingers underneath the other one. So just gently over your heart like that. And repeat after me. Even though we've been told that viruses exist and they make plants, animals, and humans sick, there is no proof that they do. And I accept myself and how I feel. Even though we've been told that viruses exist, excuse me, and can be transmitted to others and make them sick, There's no proof that they do. And I accept myself and how I feel. Even though we've been told that viruses exist, and can be transmitted to others and make them sick, there's no proof that they do. And I accept myself and how I feel. Viruses feel scary. I've learned I can catch them and they can make me sick. I learned I can pass them to others and make others sick. I've learned viruses are actual things, proven by scientific methods. But the methods are weak and faulty and actually fraudulent. How do we know viruses make us sick? It's never been proven. How do we know we can pass them on to others and make them sick? Neither has been proven. Ever. Not once. Sick people do not make healthy people sick. Sometimes we get symptoms at the same time. But this is not proof of contagion. When people are exposed to toxic chemicals, some get similar symptoms, but others do not. When our environment contains harmful radiation, such as 5G microwaves, our bodies attempt to heal. And we can have similar symptoms. Our bodies are ever seeking optimal health. Our bodies help us by creating more life. And let's take a breath here, and we'll do a sigh of relief. So small breath in through the nose, larger breath in, and then with mouth closed, and repeat after me. The so-called immune system may make proteins. We call them antibodies. But antibodies are not specific for one thing. Some who have antibodies are perfectly healthy. And some who have symptoms do not have antibodies. Viruses are not attacking me. There is nothing to fight. We could rename our immune system and instead call it a healing and cleansing system. We also learned that vaccines prevent viruses, but this has never been proven, ever. not once. If there are no viruses that can make us ill, no vaccines are needed. Vaccines are only poison. They do not prevent illness. They only harm. And with no proof of contagion, there is no need for masks. There is no need for social distancing. There is no need for tests. And let's take a nice breath here again, through the nose, deep into the lungs, to the bottoms of the lungs. And repeat after me. This is all so new. I'm surprised by this information. It feels so weird. We've been told something is true. That's never been proven to be. It feels like we've been lied to, betrayed. That feels unfair. If I cannot trust the science, I suppose it's time to trust my body. I begin to feel the shift. My body is on my side. It's helping me to adapt to my environment. As long as I befriend my body and support it, it does everything I need to be well. I support my body by eating healthy food, by standing barefoot on the ground daily, by getting sunshine on my skin daily, and by drinking pure, clean water. I energize my body by doing these things. I move with ease and comfort and breathe through my nose. I sleep in darkness and find inner peace. I practice heart-brain coherence regularly. I resolve my traumas and let go of the past. I allow myself to receive the life-generating sensations of my positive experiences and thoughts. I am in charge of how I feel. I am grateful. As I move forward in my life, I allow in these new truths. I feel safe knowing these things. I feel relief knowing I cannot make others ill. I am in charge of my health and well-being. I feel empowered by that. I support my body, and it supports me. I appreciate my body, and I am grateful that it knows how to thrive and how to create more life. Thank you, body. Thank you, life. And now you can relax your hand, and we'll take a nice breath, a sigh of relief, small breath in through the nose, larger breath in, and then with mouth closed. And now let's just lock this. We'll just lock this into place using a little heart coherence. I don't know if you heard my stomach is growling. I find that this happens often when I do EFT. So we're going to do a little heart coherence just to sort of lock this in and let the subconscious mind know this is new information we want to keep here and it is good for us. So breathing, imagining, breathing through the heart. Just drop right in. Nice and slow, like 5 or 6 seconds in and 5 or 6 seconds out. Through the heart. And if you could please say these words too. My subconscious mind says yes to all this new information. It's helpful. Thank you so much for joining in today. Thank you so much for taking your time to listen and to be here with us. And if you couldn't be here live and you're listening to this in the future, thanks for doing that. I really do appreciate that people are joining in and getting these bits of information. If you could please share what you know when you've learned something new for yourself that helps you. Please share that with others so that they can grow as well. And if you get trapped in the mind of, there's all these poisons and toxins in the world, remember the barium planarium, and you might have a little smile on your face when you do that, because we can adapt, and we are adapting all the time. That's what the body does. It's trying to create ever more life. So something comes at us, it's going to try. It may make us have symptoms for a while, but the idea for the symptoms, the reason for them is to help us to process this and to clean ourselves back out. We can't make anybody else sick. We're the ones in charge. We are our own healthcare advocate and practitioner. And that's where our power is. We don't need someone to tell us we're sick or tell us we're well. We know how we feel, and becoming more aware of that is the key to our evolution as a species. When we are thinking about the field of energy that we're made of, that runs through us, that is everywhere, the ambient energy, ask yourself the question, what am I feeding the field? This comes from Roland McCready from the Heart Math Institute in this heart coherence piece. Are you feeding the field fear? Are you feeding the field confidence? Are you feeding the field anger? Are you feeding the field love? Are you feeding the field joy? What are you feeding the field? Because we are all interconnected. You're allowed to feel everything you feel, but just remember that if we can change our thought from one that's causing us strife and challenging emotion, and change the thought to something that actually feels pretty good, right? When we think about something I'm grateful for, or a scene in nature, or a favorite pet, or anything like that. When we bring that thought to mind, we're feeding the field those good positive emotions, and the vibrations resonate out. Positive emotions have more energy than negative ones. So we can actually grow this in our own personal lives, but also what are we doing for the rest of the planet, and maybe even beyond that. Who knows where that energy goes? Probably beyond. You are an individual energy spark, and you're important to our whole field. We need you here. We need you to be at your highest and best and most bright and full of life. That is sending the signal that we are the ones in charge. No one's going to tell us what to do. Yeah. Thank you so much for being here. And let's go ahead and do our 3 bells as we go out. This has been Move Into Coherence. I'm Pamela Stokes. Send yourself some appreciation for joining in today, too. Give yourself a little pat on the back. There's acupoints back there that can help you as well. I do appreciate you. And we'll see you next time. And here's our 3 bells.